On what should have been the most perfect day of her life, standing in a ballroom that looked torn from the pages of a fairy tale, the bride, Leah, had only one fear. One single detail that could shatter her dream into a nightmare. The arrival of her own father. "He's not going to fit in, Jess," Leah whispered to her maid of honor, her own reflection in the mirror a vision of almost painful perfection. The gown, the crystals, the white orchids. Everything was flawless. "It's not that I don't love him, you know I do. But look around. These people, they measure a person's worth by the designer on their label, by the car in their driveway." Her eyes swept across the guests, a collection of polished smiles and glittering jewels. "He's going to show up in that old suit, with that honest-to-a-fault, naive smile, and all those pitiful glances will turn to us. To me." Jess squeezed her hand, but Leah barely felt it. Her fear was an ocean. "And the gift? He told me on the phone he had something special, something no amount of money in the world could buy." "Oh God, Jess, I'm terrified to even imagine what that could be." And as if her words had the power to summon fate itself, the grand, heavy doors to the ballroom began to creak open. There he was, not an imposing figure or a titan of industry, but just a man, Frank, standing in the doorway. His eyes searched for only one person in that entire sea of opulence. His suit, though clean and pressed, betrayed its age in the threadbare seams and the slightly faded fabric. It was a navy so dark it was almost black, a modest shadow against the golden glow of the party. But what truly set him apart wasn't his clothing. It was the look on his face. A pride so pure and radiant it seemed to generate its own light. The murmurs started, discreet as the buzzing of wasps. A glance here, a whispered comment there. He didn't notice. To Frank, the entire ballroom, with its chandeliers and priceless arrangements, had vanished. There was only the point of light at the end of the aisle. His daughter in her wedding dress. He took the first step, and with it, began the long walk through the social minefield Leah dreaded. Each step her father took toward the head table echoed in Leah's internal silence. Left, right. A slow, torturous march toward the epicenter of her panic. He passed by tables, offering a shy nod to anyone who met his gaze. In his hand, he clutched a small, brown paper-wrapped package as if it were an anchor in this unfamiliar ocean. Leah forced the most convincing smile she could muster, feeling the gaze of her new husband, Marcus, upon her. "Is that your father?" he whispered, the confusion clear in his voice. "Yes," she answered, the word catching in her throat like sandpaper. This man, who had once been her entire world, now seemed like a stranger from a distant land, and Leah felt a chasm open between the little girl who adored him and the woman who was ashamed. He finally stopped in front of her. The familiar scent of laundry soap and honest work hit her. A childhood memory that now felt like an accusation. "My little girl," Frank's voice cracked, breaking the spell. "You're the most beautiful bride this old man has ever seen." Leah stood, the rustle of her silk gown sounding like a protest. She gave him a quick, rigid hug, painfully aware of every pair of eyes on them. She felt the roughness of the old suit against her skin, a jarring contrast to the luxury that enveloped her. He, in his innocence, held her tight, a hug that contained decades of love. Then he pulled back and held out the small package. "It's not much," he said, his eyes glistening. "But I promise. It's everything." Leah took it. It was light, almost weightless. With a tight smile, she placed it on the table, right next to a solid silver box from another guest. "Thank you, Dad," she said, turning back to her husband. Her hope was a desperate prayer, that the awkward moment would be swallowed by the celebration and forgotten by everyone. Leah did what she did best. She performed. She turned to a pair of her father-in-law's business partners, diving into a conversation about luxury real estate with a dazzling smile. Frank understood the gesture, not with bitterness, but with the quiet wisdom of a father who knows his child. He saw that she needed space. With a dignity no one there could afford, he found an empty chair in a far-off corner, where he had a perfect view of the ballroom. From there he watched. He watched the way Leah gestured, the elegance he hadn't taught her but that she had acquired. A young waiter, about his own age when he'd started out, approached him. "Can I get you some water, sir?" "Champagne." Frank smiled. "Just water is fine, son. Thank you." His gaze then returned to the head table, fixing on the small brown package, an island of simplicity in a sea of ostentation. As Leah laughed, the image of another party, from so many years ago, surfaced in his mind, bringing with it the bitter taste of the first wound. 15. She'd been 15 years old, and the entire world hinged on the approval of her friends. A party at the most popular girls' mansion. In his memory, Frank saw Leah in the lavish backyard, laughing with a circle of teenagers. He had promised to pick her up at 10. And at 10 o'clock sharp, the headlights of his old work truck, the one with the dent in the door and the patch of rust, illuminated the grand entrance. Frank got out, still in his grease-stained coveralls, a smudge on his cheek, but a smile that stretched from ear to ear. "Princess, your chariot has arrived," he joked. The snickers from her friends sounded like shattering glass. Leah felt her face burn with shame. That night, she got into the truck in silence and cried the entire way home, never once explaining why. The memory dissolved with the sharp chime of a knife tapping against a crystal glass. Reality and a new kind of dread pulled her back. The speeches had begun. Marcus's best man was on the stage, a man in a tailored suit and a watch that was worth more than Frank's truck. "I've known Marcus since he closed his first $1 million deal," the best man began, and the crowd laughed with admiration. The speech was a checklist of achievements. Mergers, yachts, successes. From his corner, Frank applauded every compliment for his new son-in-law, genuinely happy. He didn't see competition or class divides. He only saw a man who, he hoped, would make his daughter happy. Leah, however, felt every word as another brick in the wall separating her from her father. She looked at the stage, then at her father in the corner, and a silent prayer formed in her mind. "Please, don't let anyone remember he's here. Please don't let them call him up to speak." But fate, it seemed, had its own script for the evening, and the microphone was being passed from hand to hand, moving dangerously closer to her father's simple dignity. Next, Marcus's mother, Eleanor, a woman sculpted from elegance and ambition, took the microphone. Her smile was a work of art, as beautiful as it was impenetrable. "In welcoming Leah to our family," she began, her voice projecting to every corner of the ballroom, "we aren't just gaining a daughter, we are merging legacies." She spoke of the importance of starting a life with the right foundation, subtly mentioning the generosity of the gifts the couple had received. A new car, a European honeymoon. Not once did her gaze cross into the corner where Frank sat. To her, and to the world she represented, he was invisible. Leah felt her face flush with heat, but she kept her smile plastered in place. It was the performance of a lifetime. Frank, oblivious to the veiled insult, applauded warmly at the end of the speech, proud of the family his daughter now belonged to. But something about her father's solitary, sincere applause caused a tiny crack to appear in the armor of shame Leah had built. For a single, heart-stopping moment, the noise of the party faded away. Leah looked at her father and didn't see a simple man in an old suit. She saw a king in exile. She saw the loneliness in his posture, the dignity in his solitude. And it hurt. It hurt in a way that shame could no longer mask. We all build walls to protect ourselves, but sometimes, without realizing it, we trap the people who love us most on the other side. We've all felt that desperate need to fit in, to hide a part of ourselves for fear of judgment. At that moment, Aunt Sophie, her late mother's older sister, a woman with an easy smile and curious eyes, approached the bride and groom's table. "Leah, my dear, what beautiful things," she said, examining the gifts. Her gaze, however, didn't land on the gleaming boxes. It settled on the small, brown paper package. "And this one?" she asked, reaching for it. "This one looks like it has a story." Time slowed to a crawl. Aunt Sophie's question hung in the air, a spotlight on the one object Leah wanted to keep in the shadows. The panic returned, cold and sharp. "It's from my dad," Leah replied, her voice lower than she intended. She shot her aunt a pleading look, a silent attempt to say, "Please, don't." But Sophie, in her kindness, mistook it for modesty. "Oh, from Frank. He was always the sentimental one," she said fondly. With careful hands, she picked up the small package. The string holding it together was simple kitchen twine. She undid the knot with ease. Leah held her breath, her smile frozen on her face. Her husband, Marcus, watched the scene, now curious himself. The brown paper was folded back, revealing not an object, but a small, black leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges, looking like something that had been treasured and consulted for a lifetime. A notebook, Leah's great fear, the gift that no money could buy, was a simple little journal. A wave of relief and confusion washed over her. Aunt Sophie, with the delicacy of an archaeologist unearthing a relic, opened it to the first page. The handwriting was firm, a little old-fashioned, the ink slightly faded by time. "What does it say?" Marcus whispered, leaning in. His aunt smiled, her eyes welling up. She read aloud, but softly, so only the table could hear. "May 2nd. Today, for the very first time," she said, "Dada." The whole world stopped to listen. A tender silence fell over them. It was a sentence so simple, so universal, yet it carried the weight of an immeasurable love. Leah felt a sharp pang in her chest, a distant memory trying to break through. Before the emotion could fully register, she snatched the journal from her aunt's hand. "How sweet," she said with a forced lightness, and quickly hid it under a napkin. The music swelled like a fortress wall, and Leah used it to hide. The danger, the raw vulnerability of that moment had been contained, or so she believed. She turned to Marcus and smiled. "Let's dance? I think this is our song." He hesitated for a second, his gaze still on the napkin that now concealed the notebook, but he nodded. As they moved to the dance floor, no one noticed Frank's gaze from his corner. He had seen it all. He had seen the aunt's curiosity, Marcus's tender smile, and his daughter's haste to hide the memory away. But there was no hurt on his face. There was only patience. He knew that seeds planted with love are in no hurry to sprout. He could wait. In the safety of her husband's arms, under the glittering lights, Leah allowed herself to believe the strangest moment of the night was over. "Your father," Marcus began, his voice low near her ear as they danced. "He's a man of few words, isn't he?" "He's simple," Leah replied, choosing the word carefully. "He keeps everything inside." Marcus spun her gently. "Maybe not," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe he just keeps it in the right places." His eyes met hers, full of a surprising depth. That journal, to write down every important moment of someone's life, that's a kind of wealth you can't lock in a vault. It's incredible. Leah let out a short, joyless laugh. "That's just his way," she said, trying to shut down the conversation. But Marcus's words had planted a seed of doubt. He, a man of numbers and contracts, had seen poetry where she had only seen simplicity. And for the first time, Marcus wondered what else he didn't know about the woman he had just married. The dance ended. The momentary connection with Marcus dissipated, and Leah found herself back in the role of the perfect hostess, navigating a sea of smiles and trivial conversations. She moved between tables, thanking guests, complimenting dresses, laughing at jokes she barely heard. It was an exhausting performance. Her eyes, almost of their own accord, kept drifting back to the corner where her father sat. He was now in an animated conversation with the young waiter who had served him earlier. They were laughing about something, two simple souls finding common ground amidst so much artifice. The scene was so genuine it bothered Leah. It was a reminder of a world she had left behind, a world where joy didn't have to be performed. She looked away, feeling like a fraud at her own wedding. Suddenly, Aunt Sophie intercepted her, her eyes shining with an idea that made Leah's heart stop. "I just had the most wonderful thought," she said. Wonderful was the last word Leah would use to describe any idea involving her father or that notebook right now. "What is it, Aunt Sophie?" she asked, trying to sound bright. "People should hear this," Sophie said, her voice filled with conviction. Amidst all these speeches about business deals and money, a real love story would be a breath of fresh air. Leah's panic intensified. "Aunt Sophie, no. It's personal, it's private." Sophie placed a gentle hand on her arm. "My dear, true love was never meant to be hidden. It's a lighthouse, and your father, he built a lighthouse for you, brick by brick, word by word." Before Leah could protest again, her aunt moved away with a conspiratorial smile. "Leave it to me," she said with a wink. Leah watched, helpless, as her aunt whispered into the ear of the man holding the microphone and, consequently, the fate of her entire evening. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for one more moment?" The MC's voice boomed, polished and commanding. Leah felt the floor disappear from beneath her feet. "We've had some wonderful toasts tonight, celebrating the bright future of our young couple," he continued. "But it has been brought to my attention that there is a hidden treasure among us. A different kind of success story." The MC's gaze scanned the room, and Leah prayed it wouldn't find her. But it did. His eyes locked on the corner where Frank was still chatting, oblivious to it all. "We'd like to invite to the stage a man who, I'm told, is the official chronicler of our bride's life." The spotlight began its slow, merciless sweep across the ballroom. And then it stopped, illuminating the startled figure of Frank, who blinked, confused by the sudden attention of hundreds of people. Frank was frozen in the beam of light. For a moment, he looked like a deer in headlights, vulnerable and completely out of his element. The silence in the ballroom was heavy, thick with anticipation. Leah couldn't breathe. This was it. The nightmare she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. Her father, with his simple ways and unpolished words, in front of an audience of sharks. He looked at her, across the ballroom, a silent plea for help in his eyes. And for the first time that night, Leah's shame was eclipsed by a far more powerful emotion. The instinct to protect. She made a subtle move to stand, to interrupt, to say there had been a mistake. But before she could, a beaming Aunt Sophie was at his side, taking his hand and guiding him toward the stage as if she were crowning him king. The audience applauded, a mixture of curiosity and polite condescension. To them it was entertainment. To Leah, it was the execution of her dream. To Frank, it was a test, On the stage, under the hot lights, the microphone looked like an enemy. Frank adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out at the sea of anonymous, elegant faces. "Good evening," he said, his voice a bit hoarse, amplified by the sound system. I'm not a man for speeches." A quiet, condescending chuckle was heard from one of the front tables. Frank heard it, but he didn't flinch. He looked at Leah again. She gave him the slightest nod, a nearly imperceptible gesture, but to him it meant the world. It was the permission, the strength he needed. "I didn't prepare anything," he continued, his voice gaining a bit more firmness. "But I did bring her story." The curiosity in the room became palpable. He turned toward the head table. "Leah, my girl," he called out, his voice soft yet echoing through the hall. "Could you loan me my gift back for just a minute?" Every eye in the room swiveled to Leah. Suddenly, she was no longer the hostess in control, but a player in a drama her father was about to unwittingly direct. She rose, her silk gown feeling like a lead weight. With trembling hands, she removed the napkin and picked up the small leather journal. The object seemed to burn in her hands. It was the evidence of everything she had tried to hide, and now she had to carry it across the ballroom, under the gaze of every single guest. Each step was a battle against her own pride. She placed the notebook in her father's hand. Their skin touched for a second, and it felt like an electric current passed between them. "Thank you, princess," he whispered, the same word that had humiliated her years ago, but now it sounded like a benediction. Frank opened the journal. The room held its breath. The first words he read could set the tone for the rest of the night. Triumph or disaster. Frank didn't start at the beginning. He thumbed through the pages with the familiarity of a musician reading a score he'd composed himself, searching for the exact note to begin his symphony. He stopped on a page near the middle. The silence was so complete that the sound of the turning page seemed like a thunderclap. He looked up, not at the audience, but toward the ceiling, as if pulling the memory from the air. "I'm not a wealthy man," he began, his voice calm and unapologetic. "I was never able to give my daughter jewels or trips to Europe. What I could give her was my time and my attention." He paused. "So I became a thief."
Istula moments.
Little moments that most people let slip away. He looked down at the journal. "And I kept them here, in this vault. The only vault a man like me can ever own." A tender, almost secret smile lit up his face. "Let me read you one of my favorite heists," he said. "The day she fixed my heart." Fixed his heart. The phrase hung in the air, charged with mystery. Leah frowned. She had no memory of this. She was 6 years old. Frank read, his voice now taking on the rhythm of a storyteller. September 12th. Hardest day I ever had at the shop. Got laid off. Came home feeling like the smallest man on earth. She saw me sitting in the kitchen, not saying a word. She came over, holding her little teddy bear, and said, "Daddy, are you sad?" I couldn't find the words to answer. So, she went to the first aid kit and got a Band-Aid. Frank paused, swallowing hard. The entire room was in a trance. "And she stuck it right on my shirt, over my heart." She said, "There. All better now." Frank looked up from the notebook, and for the first time, a single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. "And it was," he told the crowd. "That day, it was all better." A wave of emotion rippled through the ballroom. The condescending chuckles from before had been replaced by a respectful, almost reverent silence. The armor of the elite was beginning to crack. Leah felt the memory explode in her mind. The smell of the kitchen cleaner, the color of the Band-Aid, it was yellow, with little stars on it, the rough fabric of her dad's work shirt. She remembered. How could she have forgotten something so fundamental? She glanced at Marcus and saw his own eyes shining. He took her hand under the table, a gesture of support and awe. The simple man on stage was no longer just his wife's father. He was a poet, a giant. The man who had been a source of shame was now the moral and emotional center of the entire event. Frank turned a few more pages. But not all the moments were about healing, he said, his voice shifting to a tone of fierce pride. Some of them were about war. Va! The word sounded alien coming from such a gentle man. The audience leaned forward as one. What battles could a man like this have possibly fought? Leah always had a fire in her, Frank said, a glint of admiration in his eye. When she was 10, she decided she wanted to learn the violin. Lessons were expensive. The violin, even more so. He paused. But when Leah decides something, he left the sentence hanging, and Leah, in the audience, felt a blush of pride mixed with a fresh pang of guilt. So I went to war. A silent war. He read from the journal, March 15th. Started pulling double shifts at the plant. Exhaustion is an animal that chews on your bones. But the sound of her violin, even when it's out of tune, is the most beautiful music in the world. Frank looked at his own hands, clean now, but still marked by those years. She never knew about the second job, he said softly. Her hero couldn't look tired. That quiet confession hit Leah with the force of a physical blow. The violin. The instrument she had quit 2 years later because it was too hard. The memory of the squeaking, out-of-tune notes, of her own childish frustration, was now stained with the image of her father's exhaustion. Every note she'd ever played had been paid for with an hour of his sleep. Every time she had wanted to give up, he had been there, silently bone-tired, but with an encouraging smile. That sacrifice, hidden so well, now seemed monumental. Leah looked at the stage and saw her father not as a simple man, but as a titan who had carried the weight of her dreams on his back without ever once complaining. The wall of shame inside her didn't just crack. It was crumbling into dust. Frank turned the page. But time moves on, he said, his voice a little heavier. And heroes, sometimes they fail. Fail. The word was a hook, promising a new layer of vulnerability. How could this man, who seemed the personification of sacrifice, have possibly failed his daughter? Her senior prom, Frank said, and a chill went down Leah's spine. She found the perfect dress. It was expensive, gorgeous. It sparkled like a night sky. He took a deep breath. I had the money saved, but that week the engine in my truck blew. The repairs, they took everything. I didn't have the heart to tell her. I couldn't break that magic. He read from the journal, his voice almost a whisper. June 21st. Sold my father's watch today. The only family heirloom I had. She can never know. Her smile when she tried on that dress is worth more than all the time in the world. Frank closed the notebook. That was my greatest heist, he said. And my greatest failure, because I had to hide the truth from her. The truth. The word struck Leah not as a sound, but as a physical force. Her grandfather's watch. The watch she had loved as a little girl. The one her dad had claimed he'd lost. He hadn't lost it. He had sacrificed it. For her. For a dress. For a smile. The sheer magnitude of that silent, absolute love crushed her. The shame she had felt all night was nothing compared to the shame she now felt for herself. On stage, Frank seemed to have aged 10 years. The confession had hollowed him out. He looked at his daughter, and in his eyes was an apology. An apology for not being the rich father she might have deserved. He turned to the audience, ready to leave the stage. Thank you for your time, he said, his voice low. But before he could take a step, a sound stopped him. A single sound. The sound of a chair being forcefully pushed back. It was Leah's father-in-law, Marcus's father, the pragmatic, millionaire businessman. He was on his feet, and he was applauding. His applause wasn't polite. It was reverent, respectful. Then Marcus stood beside his father, his palms joining the sound. Next, Marcus's mother, the tears now visible on her sculpted face, rose to her feet. Aunt Sophie, weeping openly, stood. One table, then two. In a wave that started with one man and spread like wildfire, the entire ballroom, every guest, every waiter, every single soul in that room, was on their feet. They weren't clapping for a speech. They were honoring a life. They were honoring a father. Frank just stood there, stunned, the tears now streaming freely down his face. But the one person he couldn't see was the only one that mattered. Leah didn't stand up, because she was already running. The expensive dress, the perfect hair, the performance, it was all gone. She was just running, her heart leading the way. She flew up the steps to the stage, the sound of her own sobs mixing with the thunderous applause. Frank turned just in time to catch her in his arms. She didn't embrace him like an elegant bride. She crashed into him like the 6-year-old with a Band-Aid, the 10-year-old with a violin, the teenager in a dress made of stars. "I'm so sorry," she cried, her voice muffled against his chest. "Daddy, I'm so sorry." Frank held her with all the strength he had. He stroked her hair, the same gesture he had used to soothe her from nightmares her entire life. He didn't say, "I forgive you." He said something far more powerful. "My little girl," he whispered in her ear, his voice thick with love and relief. "There is nothing to forgive. There never was." On that stage, locked in an embrace, time seemed to stop. For Leah and Frank, the world, with its judgments and its expectations, had disappeared. All that remained was the rediscovered truth between a father and a daughter. When they finally separated, Marcus was already on stage beside them, placing a hand on Frank's shoulder. "Sir," he said, with a respect he had never shown before, "I have a lot to learn from you." The wedding had been transformed. The expensive gifts on the table looked cold and lifeless next to the small leather journal, which now sat at the center of everything. The guests no longer saw a poor man. They saw the richest man in the room, whose fortune was measured in love, sacrifice, and memory. The party went on, but with a new heart, a new soul. Later that night, sitting in a quiet corner, Leah opened the journal one last time. There was one final entry on the very last page, written in a single line. The date on the entry was from that very morning. The handwriting was a little shaky, perhaps from the emotion of the day to come. Leah read the sentence aloud, just for her father and Marcus to hear. September 26th. Today I don't give her away to another man. I give her back to the world, which she will surely make a better place. My greatest masterpiece. My finest heist. My daughter. The tears returned, but this time, they were tears of pure gratitude. The greatest gift wasn't in the memories of the past, but in the blessing for the future. What is the most valuable memory someone has ever given you? If this story touched your heart, share it with that person and let them know how much it meant. We spend our lives searching for treasure in all the wrong places, when the greatest legacies we can ever receive and leave behind are written in the quiet memories we build in the hearts of others. After all, what is your most precious story? And more importantly, who needs to hear it today?